Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Lewis Too Much Analyzes Comics. We're going to be continuing our series on The Question. This episode is going to cover issues 19 and 20. I'm going to tell you guys off the bat that unfortunately I did not like these issues, which was kind of a surprise to me because I hadn't read The Question series in several years, and I remember initially when I read it, loving it, as I've talked about in other videos. And obviously I still love it. But I didn't remember any parts of the series that I didn't like. And so when I read these two issues and I didn't like them, I was surprised by that. And I actually ended up putting them down, and I kind of avoided making a video about them because I was like, man, is something going on here that made me not like them. Maybe I was just in a bad mood when I read them. And so I put them down, and I ended up reading them several weeks later again, and I still didn't like them. And so I'm gonna go into some of the things that I didn't like in these issues throughout this review, which it kind of sucks because the whole reason that I'm starting this channel is because I want to analyze comic series that I love, comic series that I think do a great job. And for the most part, obviously, I think that The Question does a great job. It's just that, these two specific issues, they just don't do it for me. And so let's go ahead and get into the issues, and we'll talk about why. All right, so we're going to start off with issue number 19. Issue number 19 is called The Plastic Dilemma, which we'll get into it a little bit more in a little bit here. But yeah, the plastic dilemma is part of what doesn't do it for me in this issue. But anyways, the issue opens up with a newscast from Vic Sage, and we're taken back to when Butch Cassidy breaks out his partner from jail, and he's using a plastic gun to break out his partner. He uses the plastic gun to sneak past the metal detectors in the prison. And so Vic Sage is linking the guns to the manufacturer of the gun, who is this guy named Paulus. He owns the plastic manufacturing company that makes these guns. And watching the newscast is this gentleman named August. And August is, as he's described a little bit later, he was initially married, and his wife ended up passing away. And so afterward, he went a little bit insane, and he started dating a blow-up doll, a sex doll. And he lives with this sex doll, and he talks to her like she's a person. I'm going to actually state that this is actually my favorite part of the issue. The fact that Denny O'Neil can take this like very, very strange person and humanize him and make him somebody that you can kind of root for, even though the way that he's living is obviously very strange. And that's one of the things that I love about Denny O'Neil, is that he humanizes his characters. And that's actually going to be my complaint throughout the rest of the video regarding some of the other characters that he introduces in this issue. So anyways, so August is watching the TV, and he's talking about how he's actually had Vic Sage in his limo before. So we find out that August is a limo driver, which is going to come into play a little bit later on in the issue. All right, from there, we're taken to Myra, who's putting on some makeup because she's about to meet with the gentleman that was talked about in the news broadcast, Paulus, the owner of that plastic manufacturing company. She's going to meet with him, and her advisor is actually wanting her to strike up a deal with Paulus so that essentially like she arranges for him to be able to move some of his business into Hub City. This will generate a bunch of jobs in Hub City. And so in a sense, it works out for her because she's going to be bringing in jobs into the city. And so it works out for her campaign. And then also it works out for Paulus, who's getting to, build in Hub City. And Myra is kind of questioning the whole situation because she feels dirty about the fact that he makes plastic handguns as one of his products. And so she's kind of like questioning this back and forth. She's discussing this with her advisor, and the advisor is essentially telling her, like, nobody's perfect. We all do, bad things. You have bad things in your past. You kind of gotta overlook that, right? And so she decides, okay, let me give this guy a chance. And so she's introduced to this guy, Paulus. And like I said before, Denny O'Neil, he does a really good job humanizing people. This Paulus character, this is one of the big reasons why this issue didn't work for me. This guy, so his whole gimmick is that, he's a plastic manufacturer, but he's like obsessed with plastic, which just seems like a really strange thing for a person to be obsessed with. Now, it's not to say that there aren't people in real life who are obsessed with very strange things, right? Personally, I work. I'm not gonna say where I work, but I work at a place that provides a product that I wouldn't think anybody would be like super passionate about the product. It's one of those things that's more of a necessity than it is something to be like passionate about. But the owner of the company, he is actually like really passionate about it. He believes in it. He's like talking about it all the time. It's like something that really drives him and that gives him motivation and things like that. And so, to a degree, there's a disconnect between he and I in regards to the passion level. And so I do understand that there are people who maybe take their business really personal, but for some reason, plastic, like even the thing that, I don't want to talk about where I work, but the product that we sell, to a degree, it like helps people and things like that. Like I said, it's kind of a necessity. And in this guy's case, like plastic just I don't see how you could develop like a mental fetish for for plastic. And his whole one of the things that he says specifically about why he loves plastic is because everything else decays. So human beings decay, organic life decays, but plastic remains forever. And I don't know, again, maybe it's just me, but the kind of like cheesiness to that, this character just, he doesn't seem realistic to me. He seems intentionally crazy, and like all the characters as they discuss him all talk about him as crazy. And but it's like a crazy in a way that to me just doesn't seem like it gives dimension to the character. It just seems like kind of a stupid character that then all the other characters comment on how stupid he is, on how stupid of a character it is. And to me, that kind of like self-aware writing where like you're doing something stupid, so then you make all your other characters like notice that thing that you're doing is stupid, that doesn't really work for me. Because ultimately, like, if you're doing something stupid, why are you doing it? And I don't know that that's what Denny is doing here. In fact, I actually don't think that that's what he's doing here. I think that he thinks that he's creating a character that is realistically crazy, that's probably based on somebody that he had some kind of experience with. But at least for me, it doesn't work. And so then that kind of like messes up with the whole issue, because essentially plastic becomes the theme of the comic. Now, I don't know if this was something in the 1980s that was like a big concern, the idea of plastic. I know, like now, I assume that the idea of like recycling plastic and all of that stuff was kind of in development during that time. And so now it's kind of a mainstay that we just do that, and we don't really concern ourselves too much with the use of plastic. And so I don't know if this was just something that was weighing on Denny's heart, the idea that, plastic is this objective evil that needs to be discussed in the question. But at least for me, that's why I'm saying it didn't connect with me. I don't get what the big deal is about plastic. I don't know why it's something that Denny felt needed to be discussed in the question. But anyways, let's keep going. So as Myra talks to Paulus, we're also shown glimpses of August making love with his blow-up doll. and so it's kind of like driving home the fact that this poor guy, he's totally nuts, and he talks to her like she's a real person, and like yeah, so which again, like I said before, he's actually my favorite part of the issue, because he comes off very human, and he actually gets to have like a happy moment at the end of the issue. um uh so like you're kind of rooting for this very strange person, and so that again, see, that's what I'm saying, is that like the this character, you know, like he's crazy, but he's crazy in a way that like you can understand, versus Paulus, that he's crazy in a way that I've never, I can't imagine ever meeting somebody like that, and if I did, I would instantaneously think like this person is a whack job and nobody should listen to this person, because you know that sort of an obsession with plastic doesn't, I don't know, it's just strange. All right, and now we're gonna move on to the next character that I have a problem with, which is Myra's campaign opponent. So it's this guy named Dinsmore. He's also running for mayor of Hub City, and this is another character that I just feel like Denny doesn't do a good job in making him into a human being. He essentially is just like the embodiment of everything that people on the left side of the political spectrum view as bad about people on the right side of the political spectrum. He's literally just a cartoon character version of all the things that people on the left accuse people of on the right of being, and it's funny because there's this issue leading into No Man's Land. It's this issue of Azrael, where Denny O'Neil, he writes that series as well, and there's this politician that ends up getting assassinated, and that's kind of like the driving force behind the whole story. He's a Republican, but he has kind of like certain liberal ideas, and so like Denny O'Neil very much paints him as like a good guy, even though you know he's part of the political opposition that Denny O'Neil ascribes to, right? Um, and I really appreciated that because of the fact that, you know, it, to me, that's the sign of a good writer, is somebody that can take somebody on the opposition, give him humanity, give a reason why it is that that person exists, why it is that that person believes the things that they believe. Because to me, that's the whole point of writing, right? Is so that we can understand different viewpoints, understand why different people view the world in different ways, even if we disagree with them, or even if ultimately they're wrong, which, you know, obviously all of us are human beings, and all of us have things about us that are wrong, and we think things that are wrong, we believe things that are wrong, we're motivated by desires that are sometimes wrong, sometimes they're self-destructive, sometimes they're destructive towards other people, and so the role of a writer, at least in my mind, is to explain why it is that there's people that view the world in a different way than we do. And typically that's what Denny O'Neil does. That's what he does when he humanizes like characters that are very obviously very strange, like August, who's married to a blow up doll, right? He humanizes that character, but then he kind of does the opposite to this political character that he creates to oppose Myra, in the sense that like he's just a pure bigot. Like that's literally his defining characteristic, is that he's a bigot. And not only is he a bigot, but they actually go out of their way to say that he has ties to the KKK. So he's not only just like a run-of-the-mill regular bigot, he's actually like the most hardcore evil sort of bigot that you can possibly be. And to me, like, it's kind of lazy writing, because ultimately, of course, you have to root for Myra in that situation, even if Myra is herself mistaken in any way, because this guy is such an objectively evil character that you know, no matter who you are, you're gonna be a good guy by comparison. And so the thing is that there's no complexity to that, there's no intrigue to that, and so this is again why the issue kind of falls flat for me, because of the fact that Denny O'Neil chose to go that route with this character. And it's funny because in preparation for this series, I ended up listening to some interviews by Denny O'Neil, and he was talking about um, how he and Chuck Dixon. So Chuck Dixon is a Republican, and Denny O'Neil uh, obviously is a liberal or on the left, a Democrat, whatever you want to call it, and and he talks about how he used to let Chuck Dixon tell stories from a right wing perspective because of the fact that he allowed himself to tell stories from a left wing perspective. And he discussed how he and Chuck Dixon used to like get into these political arguments all the time. And he ended up saying this thing which kind of made me sad, because initially I was like, oh, that's so awesome. Like, you know, these two guys, they view the world in different ways, but you know, they can come together and they can discuss something that they mutually love, which is, you know, writing and comics and the comic characters and all that kind of stuff. But he kind of like flowed from there to talking about Frank Miller, and he started talking about how Frank Miller, he has these specific phrases and viewpoints that he was espousing, and Denny O'Neil was like, oh, yeah, when I start hearing certain buzzwords and buzz phrases, you know, I just know to dismiss that person because they're, you know, I start knowing like this person is like way on the right, and like I'm just not gonna listen or pay attention to that person anymore. And I found that kind of disappointing because of the fact that one of the things that I love about Denny O'Neil so much is the fact that I knew those stories about him and Chuck Dixon working together, and the fact that he would allow Chuck Dixon to write things from a right wing perspective while he himself was writing things from a left wing perspective. And that, to me, that's actually the ideal situation, is when you're getting a bunch of writers from different perspectives writing things from their perspective, so that we as readers have as many uh, viewpoints available to us as possible, so that we can kind of sift through the different viewpoints. Obviously certain viewpoints are going to be more extreme than others, and so we can maybe like move more towards the center between the two viewpoints. And maybe there are things that we can learn about extreme viewpoints, because certain extreme viewpoints might need to pull us in a direction that we need to go. And obviously all of us as individuals have to make the individual choices as to, you know, what's fair in terms of, you know, how far we're going to go in one direction or another. But to me, that's what I like in terms of writing, or at least that's what I respect in terms of writing, is when we have a bunch of different viewpoints available to us. And it was kind of disappointing to hear Denny O'Neil say something like that, because of the fact that, see, personally, I have, if you can't tell by my personality, I'm somebody that I like talking with different kinds of people, discussing things with people with different viewpoints. And so I have friends who are left wing, I have friends who are right wing, and it's funny to me sometimes, because of the fact that I have this more like observer personality, and I can kind of disconnect from conversations and observe them from as if I'm not taking part in them, even though obviously I am. How a lot of times how similar the two the two sides end up sounding, because both of them end up having these like buzz phrases and catchphrases and things like that that they fall back on to essentially like bolster their viewpoint. And you know, I'll give two examples from both sides. I used to be part of like a it was like a neighborhood association kind of a thing, and basically everybody in the neighborhood association was on the left, like really far on the left. Like I don't think I would be insulting them and calling them socialists. Um, and they would, you know, and basically I was the only one that I've said before, I'm not very political. I enjoyed listening to things that are political, but personally I don't. I'm very skeptical politically, and so, anyways, you know, they would sit around and you know, discuss things from a left wing perspective, and I would listen and participate, and I would ask questions, because I wanted actually to genuinely understand where they were coming from. And uh, it was always funny to me how sometimes, you know, I would ask them questions, and they would hit me back with like these very canned, you know, like uh, like generic catchphrases. And when I start kind of like trying to drill them down, and I wasn't trying to be antagonistic, I was literally like trying to understand, why it is that they believe what they believe. And it actually came to the point where one of them actually told me, well, I just believe this in my heart, and if I believe it in my heart, I can't say anything beyond that, I believe it with my heart. And um I'll never forget that, because I was like, okay, so ultimately this is just a belief that you have. It's a deep-seated belief that you've put your faith into. How is that any different than somebody from the other perspective who's done the same sort of thing? And so I'll give a counter uh, situation where, like, the exact same thing happened to me. So I have family members that are very far on the right, and they're the kind of prototypical listening to Fox News all, like, literally all day. That's all that they listen to. And so, like, again, I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of them, and they're all discussing these things, and I'm asking questions, and like, a topic comes up, and I start kind of like drilling them down on the questions, because I really, again, I want to understand, okay, why is it that you think this? Why is it that you view the world this way? And they do the exact same thing, where they fall back on these like cliche catchphrases, and it's like, okay, so why is this wrong that this person did that? And it's like, well, it's because it's wrong, and and that's the way that it is. Of course it's wrong. And it's like, okay, well, ultimately, the point of me telling those stories is that, as somebody who's a little more politically neutral, it's really funny to me how often I find myself in situations where both sides sound almost exactly like each other. And so, to me, I identify more with people who kind of are able to take a step back and see the similarities between all sides, really, because even uh, the next series that I actually want to cover in this channel is V for Vendetta, which is written by Alan Moore, who is an anarchist, a left-wing anarchist. I love that series. I love that book, and so I'm gonna cover it next. And see, he's somebody who's very obviously on an extreme. Because we cannot run society by anarchistic rules, but I think that there's value in reading somebody who's an anarchist, because I think that they bring things to the table that that somebody that thinks much more structured and hierarchically is not going to be able to see, because of the fact that that's the way that they think. And so all that to say, I went on this whole spiel to basically say I was kind of sad that Denny O'Neil decided to go this route with this character, because it ultimately robs the story of any drama, because it's very obvious, like, okay, yeah, this guy's a bigot. There's no dimensions to the character. That's actually something that, when we get to V for Vendetta, that I want to discuss, is how, because it's actually a point of difference between the comic and the movie, is how the bad guy in V for Vendetta, in the comic, he is a three-dimensional character. And even though he is very obviously crazy, very much like the guy in this book who's in love with a blow-up doll, in very similar ways, actually, but we'll get to that when we get to that. He's a three-dimensional character. You can kind of understand, even if he is crazy, why he's crazy, versus this guy, it's just, oh, he's a bigot. Okay, well, I mean, there's just nothing to that, and it's a stereotype of one side of the political spectrum. And ultimately, I don't think writers should fall back on that kind of thing. It's not to say that there aren't right-wing people that are hyper racist and bigoted. I have interacted with some people like that in my family. Some of them outside of my family that were way, way worse. So it's not to say that those people don't exist, but it's just, as characters, it's not interesting, because it's like, okay, well, this person is just this one bad quality, that's all that they are. That's not a character. That's it. That's why it falls flat for me. So I went on that very long spiel. So let's continue. And actually, I don't know that I have too much more to say about the issue beyond that. So basically, from there, See, this is why, like, because typically the philosophical conversations between the question and Aristotle Roeder, um, they're always like one of the highlights of the issue. And in this issue, um, the question and Ta end up discussing what his mask is made of, and Ta ends up revealing to him that it's made out of plastic. And I don't know if it's supposed to be this like moment where it's like, oh man, I've been talking bad about plastic this whole time, and my mask is plastic. I'm a hypocrite. I was just like, for me, it's like, okay, man, like plastic. Who cares that your mask is made out of plastic? I don't know, whatever. From there, we go to something else that I don't like about this issue. So, so Vic ends up going on TV. So he ends. uh, he and Myra end up talking about the fact that Myra's trying to make this deal with Paulus, and Vic, he's really upset about it. He's enraged about the fact that Myra would even consider going into bed with this wackadoo who's in love with plastic and whose company produces plastic handguns. And she kind of goes back at him saying, he doesn't, uh, you know, he doesn't control what happens with the handguns. He only produces them. And Vic, see, this is one of those things where I don't know that I really want to get into like a gun conversation. Not because I'm scared, but really just because this video is already long enough as it is for a couple of issues that I didn't enjoy. But needless to say, he ends up saying that these plastic guns are specifically designed to bypass metal detectors and security systems. And so, really, like, there's not any good way of utilizing these guns. Really, it's only for bad guys to utilize them. And so I think that that's a fair argument without getting into the whole debate about whether or not guns are good or bad or whatever. All right, so moving on from there, like I said, this is the thing that, or as I brought up before, this is the thing that Vic does that I don't like it. And so Vic ends up going on the news, and he's talking about the situation where Butch Cassidy broke into the prison, and he used the plastic handgun to shoot the guards. And he says, okay, I'm going to show a picture of this guy, Butch Cassidy. But instead, he shows a picture of Paulus on the news. And then he's like, oh, I'm sorry, that was a mistake. We accidentally showed Paulus's picture instead of... And so the implication there, right, is that Paulus is actually the one that's responsible for the killing, even though Butch Cassidy was the one that did the killing, because Paulus is the one that manufactured the gun. And he ends up getting chewed out by his boss for doing that, because his boss says that that's a dirty stunt that he pulled, by basically like trying to associate subliminally in people's minds one with the other person, right? And the issue here is that I completely agree with Vic's boss. That's a completely douchebag thing to do. And what's so funny is that, see, and this goes back to the... where, again, see, as somebody who stands outside and kind of sees sometimes both sides and the way that they argue, is, to me, when I saw that, I was like, man, that is so something that Steve Ditko's version of the question would have done. Some, like, this is the right thing to do, and so it doesn't matter if I do, like, if I manipulate the situation to make sure that everybody knows that it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do, and so I have to do it, right? And to me, see, Denny O'Neil, the whole reason that he took Vic Sage, the Steve Ditko version of Vic Sage, and transformed him into this like kind of Buddhist version of Vic Sage, or at least martial arts influenced version of Vic Sage, is that Denny O'Neil didn't like the fact that Steve Ditko's version of the question was this kind of like hardcore crusader that, always defined right and wrong in terms of black and white. And yet here's Denny O'Neil's version of the question doing exactly the same thing. He's in his mind defining, okay, this guy manufactures plastic guns. He's obviously bad because of the fact that he does that. And so now I get to do whatever it is that I need to do in order to make sure that this guy doesn't get away with his crime, right? Even if what I'm doing is unethical or immoral or, you know, whatever phraseology you want to assign to that, right? And like, to me, that's not a very likable quality. Now that's fine, you know, like main characters don't have to always they don't always have to be likable, and everything that they do doesn't have to be something that I agree with or anything like that. But I'm just pointing out how funny it is that, again, Denny O'Neil's version of the question, which is supposed to be transitioning into this more enlightened, more, you know, open-minded, morally gray sort of a character that doesn't, you know, strictly define things as good or evil, but is willing to like play with ideas and look at ideas from all sides, ends up doing the same thing that the Steve Ditko question did. All right, so from there, we find out that Paulus actually is a really bad guy. But again, Vic Sage didn't know that at the time. It turns out that Paulus was actually working directly with Butch Cassidy, and supplied him the guns, like more, I guess, more personally, rather than it just going out into a store and the guy buying it. And we also find out that Myra's advisor is also a bad guy, and that all along he's been working with Paulus, and the reason that he was trying to convince Myra to make this deal with Paulus was because of the fact that he is in bed with Paulus, and he's gonna get, you know, something out of this, and out of this arrangement. And so we end up finding out that he also knew that Paulus was working with Butch Cassidy, and basically he approves of all this, you know, like he's fine with it all, and so he's kind of trying to manipulate Myra, which ultimately, see, this is another thing about the issue that man, it's unfortunate because, again, I love this series so much, and so I don't want to like be trashing but it's just these two issues, man, they just didn't do anything for me. Is this character that's kind of been built up, like, ends up being disposed of like really offhandedly, I would say. And so it's kind of lame. But anyway, so he ends up revealing that he's, you know, a dastardly mustache twirling villain, because he finds out that Paulus was in a limousine with Butch Cassidy, and that limousine happened to be driven by August, that guy from the beginning of the issue that is in love with the blow-up doll. And so now Myra's advisor essentially arranges for this guy to be killed. And that's pretty much the end of the rest of the issue. Is the guy comes to, the assassin comes to August's house, and August he's a crazy person, and so he starts like talking to the blow-up doll while the assassin is slapping him around and trying to ask him like, hey, do you remember if Paulus was in this limousine with you or whatever? And then eventually what happens is, because of the fact that he's talking to the blow-up doll, the gunman wanting to torture him ends up shooting the blow-up doll in the head, which August reacts to as if his actual wife has died, and so he's like just devastated. Well, at the same time, Vic Sage, he ends up finding out about this limo ride, and so he comes as Vic Sage to the guy's apartment to question him, to see what's going on, because again, he's on this crusade to like take down Paulus. And so he ends up coming right at the time that the gunman is going to kill August. And of course, the guy's plastic gun malfunctions, and so Vic Sage is able to punch him and knock him out. And then Vic Sage ends up questioning the guy as the question, and doing Batman tactics to him. They're actually not shown to us. We don't know what he did, but apparently the guy ends up telling him that Myra's advisor was behind it all. And so the question shows up at the advisor's house, tells the advisor that he has to get out of Hub City and to apologize to Myra for tainting her campaign, and then the issue ends with Myra deciding not to work with Paulus. She actually makes the decision independently of knowing any of this, and so it's kind of painted as a, you know, like a virtuous moment for her. Again, see the I wish that I wish that Paulus's evil had been a little bit more clearly evil, I guess is what what I was hoping for. But then I know I'm also complaining about the fact that the, you know, the mayoral candidate is too evil. I don't know. I just wish that more work had been put into both of those characters. That's really ultimately what I'm saying. And so, anyways, Myra ends up saying that she doesn't want to do business with a corporation that is poisoned at its roots, because of the fact that if it's poisoned at its roots, then poison spreads through the whole organism, and she doesn't want to do business with an organism like that that's poisoned at its roots. I don't know if I want to say anything about that. I tend to agree with that sort of philosophy, that if something is poisoned at the roots, the poison spreads throughout, and it taints everything. But, you know, obviously there's some gray area to that. And then finally the issue ends with Vic actually repaired August's blow-up doll so that he could live happily ever after with his princess. And so that's why I said, I at the very least, I liked August as a character, and I was happy that that he got to live happily ever after in his own little way. It's, you know, that's cute. To me, that's good writing, right? Like when a character, even though they're strange and weird, the thing that they want is strange and weird, they get what they want. You're rooting for them to get what they want, right? Because they're innocent, even though they're strange. So to me, at least, that was good writing. All right, so that takes us to the next issue, which is issue 20. I liked this issue even less than the last one, to be honest. Let's dive right in. I don't even think that there's too much for me to say regarding this issue, just because at least the last issue had some kind of like sociological topics I got to talk about regarding it. This issue doesn't even have that, but we're gonna talk about it, and let's see if something comes up. So anyways, what happens is this clown character, he's the main character on a kids TV show that's filmed live. I don't know if this was something that was done in the 1980s, because I know, like in The Simpsons, Krusty the Clown is also like a live show for kids where there's a main character clown. I've never experienced that personally in my childhood, where any show was filmed live for kids. But maybe that was something from back in the day. I know that Bozo the Clown was something that was famous. I don't know if he was filmed live. Maybe I should have looked into that before making this video, but it's not something I'm overly interested in. So, but if anybody in the comments knows if this was like a typical thing that happened back in the 80s, where they'd have clown shows where the clown character is filming live, let me know. Now, the reason that that's not a good idea is because this clown character snaps and he takes off his clothes in front of the camera and exposes himself to all the little kids in the audience. It's not a good day for that studio. And so that ends up becoming kind of like the backdrop to the whole story. From there, we're taken to a political debate between Myra and the other two mayoral candidates who are running against her. And again, that what I talked about before, that Dinsmore guy, man, he's he's just a cartoon character. Like, we're introduced to him by him saying, "Kill them and burn down their houses." And so Vic Sage tells him to elaborate. You know, obviously with eloquence, please, Mr. Dinsmore, what do you mean by kill them all and burn down their houses? And so he says, certainly, Vic, I'm saying that we should first make sure that all our policemen are God-fearing, church-going Christians of proper lineage, and then we should give them the power to enforce the law. Enforce the law right there on the street. I'd empty the court calendars in a month. I'd clean out the jails, and it would get the job done. And so, like, come on, man. Like, so this guy is literally on TV advocating for police just like mowing down criminals and setting fire. Not only mowing down the criminals in the act of committing crimes, but then going to their houses and burning their houses down. Like, come on, man. Look, I wasn't around in the, I was born in the 80s, so I wasn't privy to the sorts of politicians that were available to us back then. But, man, I gotta call foul on this. That there's no way that there were people doing that. If there were, please, comment, people, criticize me, correct me, tell me, like, yes, Lewis, you don't know what you don't know what you missed in the 1980s when politicians were allowed to come on TV and say we should set fire to criminals' houses, and that all policemen need to be Christians of proper lineage, not just Christians, but they actually have to be like of like a certain sort of Christian lineage. So again, see, this guy's just a cartoon character. If you remember my review of that other issue where there's that racist detective, and Denny O'Neil ends up making him do this like noble act at the end, and so he's like humanized, even this evil racist. He doesn't. It's possible that I'm forgetting how Dinsmore's story ends and that maybe he has some kind of like redemption moment. But as it stands right now, this guy, to me, he's just boring. Like, he's just a complete cliche of everything that, again, people on the left think of people on the right. Anyways, we're also introduced to another character who I don't think has any lasting... who lasts at all in the series. I think that this is probably his only appearance, if I'm remembering right. But it's this kind of like weaselly guy that's running also for mayor, and he's like the most unoffensive guy ever. And it's funny because I gotta admit, he's me. He's somebody that, he just doesn't want to rock the boat. He just wants to get along with everybody. And his lines are like, he only has 2 lines, and I love both of them. So Vic Sage goes to him to ask him a question. This is actually my favorite part of this issue. Vic Sage, after Dinsmore goes on that rant about the police or whatever, Vic Sage is like, do you, Mr. Jazlet, do you have any comment on this? And he's like, I must say, all this talk is very upsetting to me. I don't see why we just can't all be friends, have more holidays, ice cream socials. Like, that's a policy, that's a platform to run on, man. That's the platform I would run on. Ice cream socials for everybody. Let's all just get along. Republicans, Democrats, I know that we view the world through completely different lenses, but so what? Let's just all set that aside and have ice cream together. That's the kind of mayor I can get behind. And then at the end of the whole back and forth in the political exchange, that poor guy, he comes up to Vic Sage and he's like, "Was I all right, Mr. Sage? I mean, I wasn't too loud or anything, was I?" So yeah, that guy's my favorite. I hope he wins the mayoral race, whatever. So then we're introduced to essentially what are the kind of the main characters of this story. This is part of why I didn't like the story. These characters were not bad in any way, but they just weren't interesting in any way. They're essentially circus characters, and they're like very traditional circus characters. There's a skinny guy who's Mr. Skeleton or whatever, and then there's a fat lady who's like, that's her gimmick, is that she's a fat lady. And then there's a ringmaster, and the circus is falling apart. because nobody goes to the circus anymore. And then they have this clown, and the clown is kind of missing. That's, you know, what the characters are discussing, and it's because the clown went out into the street to, I don't remember exactly what it is that he's trying to do, but he's just walking around the neighborhood in his clown outfit. And at that point, he is accosted by a band of what can only be described as very generic right-wing fascist caricatures. Again, I wasn't around in the 80s to know whether or not there were roving bands of right-wing fascists going around imposing moral order on their communities. Maybe there were. It's just not something I've been exposed to very much. And so that's essentially what these guys are, and they end up killing the clown because of the fact that that clown guy on TV exposed himself in front of all the kids. They were filled with righteous indignation, and so they went out onto the streets and they saw a clown, and hey, one clown is as good as another. What are the chances that there's more than one clown in Hub City? Which, by the way, I mean, what are the chances? Why is this clown walking around in his clown outfit? But anyways, they end up beating him to death, and so the clown dies. From there, we go to Vic Sage and Myra talking to each other, and we find out why the clown from the TV show ended up going insane. And this was another thing that, it didn't work for me, man. So what happens is this guy, he works at the TV station where Vic Sage and Myra where Vic Sage works now and Myra used to work. And he ended up losing his place or something like that. And so he was staying at a motel for a while. And the motel happens to be the motel that Myra and Vic in an earlier issue ended up getting together and hooking up, even though, she's married. And so apparently this guy viewed Myra as this kind of Madonna figure. She was like this pure, virtuous woman that he looked up to. And then to see her degrade herself by having sex with Vic Sage just drove him insane and made him into, and convinced him that all women are sluts and perverts, and that they, and so he becomes completely disillusioned, and that's what causes him to snap and expose himself to a bunch of kids. Like I said, this just doesn't work for me. I mean, again, maybe this was something that was a little more pandemic at the time, guys that viewed women as these Madonna figures and then felt betrayed anytime that a woman gave into her lusts, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know, at least for me, like, it just doesn't, like, for that to be the breaking point of a person. Why are, of all women, why are you viewing Myra as this like noble, aspirational figure, when the whole book has been about how Myra is not a noble figure? She's actually a very conflicted figure, and she's made a lot of questionable moral decisions, and which is what makes her interesting as a character. Why is this guy viewing her, of all people, as this like figure that essentially, like, it causes him to snap when he sees her having sex with somebody that she was having sex with back when they worked together at the station? So, like, wouldn't it have been kind of obvious that, like, they at least had something going with each other? I just, to me, I don't understand it. And then later on, he's gonna do something that kind of betrays even that characterization. We're taken then to the right-wing fascists, watching Dinsmore, of course. They love him. The guy makes all the sense in the world, set fire to criminals' houses, go around beating up clowns with a baseball bat. That's how you live, man. That's the way to live. And this is where, like, Denny, he loses me, because he writes these characters as like these complete buffoonish idiots, where like one guy is like, wait a minute, why are we beating up clowns? And the other guy's like, dude, it makes all the sense in the world, all right? clowns are perverts. We gotta kill them. All right. And the other guy's like, oh yeah, it makes sense when you say it like that. And it's like, I'm very loosely paraphrasing there, by the way, because I don't remember the exact dialogue. But it's basically that kind of a thing where, what they say just, it's very obvious that they're idiots. And so it's like, come on, man. Like, I need something more from my antagonists than just a bunch of idiots. So anyways, Vic Sage, he ends up finding out about the clown that was killed, and he's like, okay, so one clown went insane, one clown was killed. Maybe there's some kind of coincidence there. I'm gonna at least investigate this out of curiosity. Um, and then again, he and Tot have one of those like philosophical discussions, and it sucks because of the fact that the discussion that they're having is not really like, it's like the same thing as like with the plastic one, where it's like they're not these like deep issues. They're like very surface level issues, I guess is the best way to say it. And so it's unfortunate. Anyways, so what happens is the TV show clown ends up going to the circus. And when he's at the circus, he ends up meeting the fat lady. And this is why I say that he ends up betraying the defining characteristic that didn't work for me, because he ends up coming on to the fat lady and like essentially like trying to have sex with her. And it makes no sense to me. Why is his whole psychological breakdown occurring because of the fact that he viewed a woman having sex with a man, and now to be fair, he does go to a psychologist, and so essentially he's like cured to a degree. But I don't know, like it just feels like inconsistent to me. Like, why would that cause you such deep psychological harm to see a woman sleeping with a man, and then the first thing that you do is try and have sex with like the first woman that you interact with? So anyways, he goes to do that. At the same time, the right-wing fascist guys, they end up finding out that they killed the wrong clown, and they're like, oh well, we killed the wrong clown, but the clown had to die anyways. He's a weird clown, but we have to kill the right clown now. And so they go to the circus to try and investigate it, which of course is where the TV clown is, and it's where the question is heading, all at the same time. And so they end up killing the skeleton man here, which is very sad, honestly. Which they kind of actually do by accident, but like without caring, like they just like run him over and like they just don't care. And then from here, look, this is why, so the issue is about to end here, and I really don't even have too much to say about the end here, but like even the art completely breaks down at this point. And these, this page is fine, but like this page over here, and then the next page here is just, I don't know what happened here. This art is bad. And so anyways, long story short, the question beats up the right-wing fascists. And in the process, he gets some paint spilled on his face, which kind of makes him look like a clown. And as he's finishing up with the bad guys, Nick Dinsmore comes on the TV. Dinsmore, I don't know if his first name is Nick. That's actually the name of a wrestler. But Dinsmore, he comes on the TV, and the question, having this clown face, and then seeing Dinsmore, he's like, wait, I have an idea. And so his idea is to go around the city and paint a clown face on all of Dinsmore's posters. Why that, what that is supposed to accomplish, I have no idea. And so I'm going to end this analysis with a whimper, because I felt like the issues were both kind of a whimper. The first one had some things working for it. The second, there was nothing there for me except that poor guy that wants to run on the platform of giving everyone ice cream socials. And so I actually want to apologize if anybody does like those issues. I'm sorry that I spent 55 minutes trashing them. I hope that you'll accept the fact that, different people have different opinions, since that's kind of the whole point of my channel. I love you guys. Thanks so much for watching. See you around.